topic of today's Dhamma talk is the unfolding of wisdom. And you will remember from the very introductory talk on July 6th, the verse that the Buddha spoke in reply to a question raised by a deva, a young deva by the name of Chandana. And the question was, who crosses over the flood? And to this, the Buddha replies, as is recorded in Samyutta Nikaya 1:15, one always perfect in virtue, endowed with wisdom, well concentrated, and then one energetic and resolute crosses the flood so hard to cross. Now, what this shows is that when a person, a meditator, undertakes the meditation practice and first of all ensures that he or she is well established in virtue, and then goes on to develop concentration, and then the result of this is going to be what? Wisdom, yes indeed, the arising of wisdom. And in the same sense, when a meditator follows this gradual path of training, as all of us are doing here, namely when some initial faith in the Buddha's Dhamma arises upon hearing some Dhamma, and also faith in the Buddha arises, then this leads to right of thought, namely thoughts of renunciation. This then leads to the practice or observance of an ethical code of conduct, and then, like all of you, when one practices the restraint of the senses, indriya samvara sila, and develops mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajanya, then and furthermore overcomes the hindrances, reaches full concentration, then one is said to be developing insight. And instead of saying insight, we can also say wisdom, or we can also say insight knowledge. Now, from all of this, we can conclude that one of the outcomes of our spiritual training in the gradual path, and also and part of this being well established in virtue and training in concentration, well, the outcome of this is the arising of wisdom. And there are four things that contribute to the greatness of wisdom. Four factors that are said to lead to the acquisition of wisdom. In Pali, the term for this is panya patilabha karana. And panya is wisdom, labha is the fruit or the result, and karana is doing. So factors that lead to the arising of wisdom. Now, the Buddha gives these four factors as follows, namely association with superior persons, persons who are well established in the Dhamma. And so when one associates with such a person, then one is bound to learn something. And when one then also hears the true Dhamma, which is the second factor, then this leads one already a step further. However, just the hearing of the association with the superior person and hearing the true Dhamma is not enough. One also needs to pay attention, careful attention to what is being said. And so this then covers 3 points. And the fourth point is probably what? Yes, indeed, practice. So putting into practice what one has heard, to practice in accordance with the Dhamma. So these 4 factors are said to lead to the greatness of wisdom, and in a similar discourse they're said to lead to the realization of the fruit of stream entry. So to the path, and so by saying fruit of stream entry we can also say the path of stream entry. Now, another way of expressing this acquisition of wisdom is as follows, namely, based on faith, we then have a desire to practice. This then will lead us to aim properly at the arising object of observation, and we will also make an effort to send the mind towards that certain predominant object. This certainly will lead to the arising of mindfulness, and when the mindfulness is quite sustained, then this leads to concentration, and based on concentration and the preceding factors, well, wisdom is bound to arise. Now, there is a definite existence of a path of purification. And this path of purification, spiritual path of purification, is, for instance, described in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, which was compiled by Elder Buddhaghosa, a commentator who lived approximately 500 years after the Buddha. And this path of purification was put together based on many statements given by the Buddha himself and recorded in the text. Also, this path of purification is certainly being mentioned in the Abhidhamma Sangha, which is the compendium of the Abhidhamma. It's kind of a key work, and your entrance or your introduction to the Abhidhamma. And so this path of purification, not only is it theoretically being described in the Visuddhimagga, but there are meditators in the past who've experienced it, and there are meditators in the present who are experiencing it. And most likely there will also be meditators in the future who are going to experience the same thing. So it is a path of purification that is valid, that was valid in the past, is valid now, and is going to be valid in the future. So something rather reliable, something that has passed the test of time. And there are also teachers who guide meditators along this path, and this path has been verified by modern science. And some of those scientists, to name just a few, are Dr. Daniel Brown and Dr. Jack Engler, and of late Professor Richard Davidson has also done some research on meditators at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts last fall. And other researchers have also worked in the same direction. Now, maybe to elaborate a little bit on one point, namely, there are teachers who guide along this path. What this means is that there are teachers who've received the reports of meditators during interviews for many decades, and then have accumulated all this knowledge, and then kind of boiled down the essence of how the practice unfolds. Now, in one sense, we can speak of 16 jnanas. Now, jnana is a Pali scriptural term, and some of you may think, my goodness, what does this now mean? And a jnana is simply an insight knowledge, an intuitive knowledge or understanding. And this path of purification can also be described in a different context or by a different way of classification, namely by way of the 7 purifications. And Venerable Buddhaghosa did just this. He based his 7 purifications on a discourse known as the Ratna Vinita Sutta, the discourse on the relay chariots, and there is mention of 7 stages. And then Elder Buddhaghosa then took those 7 stages or 7 purifications and explained those further in terms of the 16 insight knowledges. And there's a certain overlap there. So, an insight knowledge is an jnana is an insight knowledge or an intuitive understanding of the intrinsic nature of things. And there are 73 kinds of insight, knowledge, or wisdom mentioned in the Patisambhida Magga, namely the path of discrimination. And so some of those 73 cover our 16 insight knowledges. And then there are a number of others, and 67 altogether are said to be shared by the disciples and the Buddha, and there are 6 which are not shared by the disciples, such as omniscient knowledge and a few others that are only limited to a Buddha. Now, the Pali term the Pali term panya, in English wisdom, is given in the Dhammasangani by way of a number of synonyms, and some of them are as scrutiny or as discriminative knowledge, or as reflection, or as comparative examination, or as breadth of knowledge, and then wisdom that destroys defilements, and then penetrative wisdom, clear comprehension, wisdom like a guide, wisdom like a sword, then in the sense in the sense that it's destroying the defilements, and then wisdom also in the sense of non-bewilderment and investigative knowledge of the Dhamma, or simply investigation of states, or sometimes it's also known as right view. So the following Pali terms are the synonyms, namely Panya and Jnana, and then Amoha, Dhamma Vijaya, and Samadeti, and Vijja. And some of the antonyms in Pali are Avijja, which is ignorance, and Ajnana is lack of insight knowledge, and Moha is delusion. Now, the classical fourfold definition for wisdom, panya, or insight knowledge is as follows, namely, in Pali it's given as Yata Sabhava Pativeda Lakkhana. It has the characteristic of penetrating objects according to their intrinsic or essential nature. So seeing things according to reality. Not seeing things according to imagination, but as they really are. And the function of the wisdom is given as illuminating the objective field, just like a lamp that is lit in a dark room dispels darkness. And in this sense, referring to this lamp, it is said that the light of wisdom, whenever it arises, dispels the darkness of ignorance. Now, this needs some further explanation. See, before we start the intensive meditation practice, or at the very beginning, we have very little direct understanding or wisdom into the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, or any other predominant object, including the nature of the mind. And when remembering the first reports that all of you have given, or most of you have given at the very beginning of this retreat, then there have been statements like, the rising arose and the falling movement of the abdomen fell, and and at the most maybe there was some expansion on the rising and some contraction on the falling. And that was it. And by now, when I hear your reports, they are much more detailed in nature, and in the way of describing what's happening in the rising movement and in the falling movement. And again, before undertaking intensive practice, and at the very beginning, one might not even be in the position of making a distinction between the rising movement and the falling movement. They seem like all the same. Why bother? And then At first, when one then finally manages to get it right and distinguish between the rising movement and the falling movement, and also see the specific sensations during the rising movement and falling movement, then gradually, or at that certain point, one might see one rising movement as one continuous movement, and one thinks, well, that's just the way it is. However, upon further practice and further observation, one realizes, no, it's not that way. The rising movement actually is a discontinuous movement, and oftentimes it comes in a segmented form. And in the case of a pain, a meditator at first sees it as one compact, solid pain of hardness or maybe tearing or so. And later on, the same meditator may say, no, it's not like this. It's a pain consisting of a pain which is breaking up and consisting of many parts and particles, smaller particles of pain. And then, as we've seen yesterday during the talk with regard to the mind, at first we take the mind to be one compact entity, and to make things worse, we even identify with it. We take it as the seat of the ego, the self, and we get totally attached to it. And then only in the course of the practice do we gain a much better understanding of the nature of the mind. And so we start to make the distinction between wholesome and unwholesome, and so on and so forth. And thus, when we compare our wisdom or our understanding or our insight knowledge at the beginning of the retreat with our understanding or insight knowledge maybe halfway through the retreat or towards the end of the retreat, well, there are huge differences there. And gradually, the light of wisdom then dispels the darkness of ignorance. Now, wisdom is said to manifest as non-bewilderment or as absence of confusion, and this has to do with the fact that we simply see formations according to reality. So we see as they really happen or occur, and thus there is no reason for any surprise. But without practice, we tend to have a wrongful view, a wrongful perception about objects of this world. And so we, just to give you another example, we take formations to be permanent when, of course, they are not permanent. And so when we've bought a new car, then we assume that this new car is going to remain new for at least a couple of years. But then, unfortunately, already 5 days after the purchase, we have an accident. Someone drives into our car, and it can no longer be classified as new. Now, to a meditator, this is nothing new, and we quickly realize, sabbe sankhara anicca ati, all formations are impermanent, and so including the car. But a non-meditator may have a hard time with this. Now, the proximate cause for the arising of wisdom is given as wise attention, and another proximate cause is given as the unification of the mind. In other words, concentration, one-pointedness of the mind. Now, there are various kinds of understanding around, and the understanding may have or has different aspects. And the Visuddhimagga in its 14th chapter, paragraph 2, clarifies that what we mean by insight knowledge is a knowledge which is associated by wholesome consciousness. So it's not kind of technical knowledge or destructive type of knowledge. Now, the function of wisdom was given to dispel darkness and or to illuminate the objective field. And as there are different kinds of insight knowledges around, each and every one of them performs a certain function. And so when a meditator undertakes the contemplation of impermanence, anicca-nupassana, then gradually a direct, very intuitive understanding of impermanence will occur, and this understanding of impermanence then will substitute or will help to abandon the wrongful perception of objects as permanent. So the function here of anicca-nupassana, contemplation of impermanence, is to abandon the wrongful notion of permanence. Likewise, the contemplation of unsatisfactoriness, or simply the insight knowledge of that part of the insight knowledge that understands dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, well, its function is to abandon the wrongful perception as certain pleasure or happiness, namely sukha sanya in the Pali language. And likewise, that part of insight knowledge that understands anatta, namely the absence of a self, abandons the wrongful perception of objects as possessing a self. And certainly that then is known as atta sanya, that wrongful perception. And then furthermore, a different insight knowledge, which is sometimes called the knowledge of disenchantment, and sooner or later you're going to experience it. Its function is to abandon delighting in formations. And this is what we do almost all the time. We delight in the beauty around here, we delight in the food, we delight in the weather, and we delight in the company of other meditators, and so on and so forth. And so, with further development of our meditation practice, we realize that formations, after all, aren't all that great. They are flawed. And they're flawed by the universal characteristics of anicca, of impermanence, of unsatisfactoriness, and of non-self, anatta. And thus, one then no longer takes delight in those certain very formations. Now, of course, there would be more to say here, but this much should suffice. And wisdom as a mental factor arises in all jhanas, and to some extent there's some amount of wisdom there. And furthermore, in path and fruition consciousness. But let me clarify right away, the wisdom occurring in the jhanas is not the vipassana type of the wisdom which discerns mind and matter and so on. And then wisdom also is said to arise in some sense sphere, beautiful consciousness, and associated with knowledge, and in some sense sphere resulting consciousness, and in some sense sphere functional consciousness, together with all beautiful universal mental states. So in the presence of wisdom, wholesome mental states have a chance to arise. But when wisdom is not there, then only certain wholesome or beautiful mental states will come up. Now, when it comes, or when a meditator undertakes an intensive retreat and is mindful from moment to moment, all day long, and this day after day, then these insight knowledges unfold one by one. And starting with the first one, and then gradually one's practice moves on, and then the second insight knowledge will unfold, and then the third one, and so on. And each of these insight knowledges do not unfold in a haphazard manner, but rather in a very systematic manner. Now, with quite some practice, so not necessarily at the beginning of one's meditation, one that might discover that there's a certain development within one single insight knowledge, or each and every insight knowledge, to be more accurate. And so at first, a meditator has to deal with material phenomena, because they tend to be the coarsest. And then, as the practice moves on, the feelings of the feeling aggregate may come into the foreground. Naturally, of course, the bodily sensations will still be there, but they're not, at that point, not that much in the foreground. And then again, with further practice, one realizes that the perceptions, as part of the perception aggregate, come into the foreground. And then after that, as things are becoming more refined, the mental formations belonging to the aggregate of mental formations, sankhara khanda, they come into the foreground, and then finally consciousness itself comes into the foreground. Although consciousness itself is somewhat difficult to see. And then we can say that once this development has taken place, then the insight knowledge has matured, then the actual final intuition or intuitive insight occurs. So each insight knowledge kind of teaches us a new lesson, a different lesson. And these lessons are graduated from the very simple, the most simple, to increasingly complex and profound lessons. Now, if at this point in your meditation practice you don't see, this development, through the 5 aggregates within one's insight knowledge, please don't worry about this. Don't be too concerned about this. Just take it as a piece of information for general knowledge. But later on, you might see this actually happening in your own meditation practice. Now, again, with some practice, a meditator might realize that within one and the same insight knowledge, the 3 universal characteristics will occur. So usually first anicca, namely one sees formations as impermanent, then one sees them to be unsatisfactory, dukkha, and then one sees them to lack a self. And once one has gone through this, and so the insight, the lesson, the intuitive lesson has been learned, and then the practice moves on, and the next insight knowledge then gradually has to unfold and mature, until that one too then ends in an intuitive understanding. Now, if a particular insight knowledge has not matured yet, and a meditator is not getting the point, the relevant point, and then one's practice will kind of stagnate and will go around a circle until one gets until one learns what needs to be learned. Now, when we undertake intensive meditation practice, then our experiences will be very much influenced by the insight knowledge we happen to be in. And in each and every insight knowledge, the rising, falling of the abdomen will manifest in a specific way, and the sitting posture tends to occur in a certain way. Sometimes, just to give you an example, one leans like this for a long time, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, to one side or the other, and at a different point, earlier point in the practice, one might find that one's sitting posture is slouching over and over again, and so on. And also, one's mindfulness, as described in one of the earlier Dhamma talks, over time or in the course of the different insight knowledges, also assumes different qualities. So sometimes it's panoramic, and then it's more one-pointed, and so on. Now, just to relate to you an occurrence that happened just recently, during the June retreat at the Forest Refuge in Barrie. There was one lady on the retreat who had practiced in the Thai forest tradition for about 10 years, and so she was an ardent meditator, and up to that point in her meditation practice, she thought that her meditation practice is unique. So her way, what happens in her practice is unique to her as a person. And for Yogi B, it would be again a different development, and for Yogi C, again something else. And then when I gave a Dhamma talk on one of the insight knowledges, after the talk, there was a question and answer session just like we have here. And she kind of protested against this, saying she felt pressurized by all these insight knowledges and whatnot. And so then during the following days, we then discussed everything, and it became obvious that she had a wrongful perception of how the practice actually unfolds. She didn't realize that when we meditate, there is a certain, there's a certain systematic development or systematic way how these insight knowledges or how wisdom unfolds. And after a while, she did accept, and actually she saw this then in her own meditation practice, and later on there was no more difficulty whatsoever. Now, when we undertake our meditation and go through these different insight knowledges, then some meditators who are on the fast lane, they want to reach the destination quickly, and then they think, well, why bother with this insight knowledge number 3? There's dukkha in there. That's not for me. I only want to have sukha experiences, meaning pleasant experiences, so let's skip that one. What do you think? Will this work? It will not work. And basically, we have to go through all of these insight knowledges. There's only one among the middle insight knowledges, one out of, or there's 3 there, and so-called dukkha jnanas, but it's different from what I mentioned just earlier on. And if one experiences one out of those, Mahasiddhanta says this is good enough. But experiencing 2 out of 3 is better, and 3 out of 3 is best. But even if one experiences only 1 out of 3, later on one will have to catch up with the remaining 2. They'll come up no matter what, even if one tries to avoid them. And then there is a really fascinating aspect regarding the development of wisdom. And we can make the following statement, that no matter what the object is that we observe, the Dhamma is there. All of the Dhamma is there. And so there's a Chinese expression that is used, or principle that is applied very much in an area such as foot reflexology. And the principle is the whole contains the part and the part contains the whole. So by massaging a particular area of the foot, one then massages a particular organ inside the body. And so the foot is, or the 2 feet, are representative of the entire body. And likewise in the meditation practice. And from a modern scientific point of view, a theory that best conforms with what happens in our actual practice is the so-called fractal theory. And one of the proponents of the fractal theory was Mandelbrot. If I'm not mistaken, Benoit Mandelbrot. Born in Poland, later on he moved to France. And he very much developed this fractal theory. And what the fractal theory is saying is that the part is included in the whole. Now, to give you a really nice illustration which will make things clear right away, you all know what a head of cauliflower looks like. And so we go to the market, we buy one, and we have it. And we have it right there. So it has kind of like this kind of a shape. And so like almost like a half moon on top. And then when we break off one part from this head of cauliflower, then what do we see?
A little head of cauliflower.
A little head of cauliflower. What was the other comment there?
I said a smaller version.
A smaller version of the same thing. Yes, there you go. And if we then break off an even smaller part from that the first part that we have broken off, then what will we see?
The same.
Again, the same. Right. And the same thing happens in the meditation practice. And so when we take an object like the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, and we observe it at the surface, and then we'll see it. We'll see maybe anicca, dukkha, and anatta in a somewhat superficial manner. However, if we then go into one aspect of this rising and falling movement, let's say the anicca part, then in this we can again see anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So the three universal characteristics. Or a different example. We take a pane, and at first it looks like one solid pane, and then when we observe more carefully, we see that it is composed of a number, sometimes a great number or multitude of smaller panes which are similar in nature. So the big pane is kind of a hard pane, and the smaller panes are all smaller hard panes. And in a wider sense, when we take maybe some sensation of hardness as an object, as our object of observation in the big toe, we can then focus on this for a longer period of time, and everything will be there. All of the 16 insight knowledges will be there, all of the three universal characteristics will be there, and the 5 aggregates we can see right there with regards to the hardness in our big toe. And we can also see the 4 noble truths there. Or we can take some itching sensation somewhere in the face and focus on that, and so make that our main object. Again, we can go through all of these 16 insight knowledges just by using that itching sensation in the face. And again, the 3 universal characteristics will be there. Everything will be there. So the notion of thing, or the notion that the Dhamma is contained only or accessible only by contemplating the in and out breathing at the nostrils, or by only doing the rising and falling movement of the abdomen is wrongfully perceived notion. But rather, whatever the object may be, the Dhamma is there. All of it, without any exception. Or to make it even more obvious, if we were to say, okay, I don't want to bother observing physical formations. It's a burden to have the body, and then it's an even greater burden to observe these bodily sensations all the time. So let me make things or life a little bit easier by limiting myself to the observation of mental states. This is much more fascinating. Well, one could do so, and if one were to do so, then all of the 16 insight knowledges would be there, and one would be able to see the 3 universal characteristics with regard to those same mental states, and the 4 noble truths will also unfold. So in the end, the object that you're observing doesn't matter. The Dhamma is ever present. Now, when it comes to the unfolding of wisdom, then it's proper to assume that this wisdom unfolds in a gradual way, at least as long as one is going through the insight knowledges. Now, the situation is a different one when it comes to the realization of path and fruition knowledge. This is a matter of just a few mind moments, so extremely short. But in order to get there, in order to get to this rather instantaneous realization experience, we need to go through this, or travel along this gradual path. Now, when it comes to the mental factor of wisdom, then just like all of the other mental factors, especially the wholesome ones, it comes in degrees. So wisdom comes or can be found ranging from a very initial weak type of wisdom all the way to a penetrative, discriminative wisdom, a wisdom that understands or penetrates something as profound as the 4 noble truths. And so it ranges from minor wisdom, like we experience it occasionally during daily life, to extremely deep levels of wisdom. And when it comes to our gaining of wisdom, then we can say, as we travel along this path towards stream entry, our wisdom will still be somewhat at the surface. We're touching basically only the tip of the iceberg. However, when our practice goes deeper and beyond that first experience of stream entry, then everything becomes wider. Every aspect of wisdom that we've gained so far gets much wider and deeper. So it is as if we're then reaching into deeper levels in the iceberg. And what is helpful to know from a meditator's point of view is that frequently a new aspect of wisdom is gained by observing the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, or sometimes it happens that a new aspect of wisdom is or becomes obvious in the walking meditation. And then gradually this understanding spreads to other objects. Then one might certainly see the same thing, the same aspect of wisdom with regard to the seeing process, hearing process, smelling process, or one might see the same thing with regard to some bodily pain or with regard to some mental state. So it starts oftentimes with the primary object, namely the rise and fall of the abdomen, or sometimes if one's walking meditation is quite advanced, then it starts with that. Now, with regard to wisdom, and the Buddha has said, and I'm quoting from Anguttara Nikaya 4:143, as translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi and published in his recent publication in the Buddha's words. There are, O monks, or nuns, or lay meditators, these 4 lights. What for? And what do you think? So, start with the very obvious. Huh? Oh, the noble truth. Oh, you're right away heading. Well, we start with the simple things. The light of the sun. And then, once we have that, it is easy to guess the second one. Then there's the light of the moon. Yes, indeed. And then as number 3, we have the light of, please don't tell me incandescent lights or so. Those didn't exist at the time of the Buddha. But
Stars.
Oh, not so bad. Well, he doesn't mention that here. Huh?
Fire?
Ah, very good. Indeed, fire. So, there are, O meditators, these 4 lights. What for? The light of the sun, the light of the moon, the light of fire, and the light of wisdom. Of these 4 lights, the light of wisdom is supreme. And so this then gives you an idea of the significance of wisdom as a quality that we as human beings need to develop. And so remember from the very outset of our very first talk at the beginning of the retreat, 2 aims were mentioned there, namely the development of true knowledge or true wisdom, and what else? Vijja and Vimutti in Pali. True knowledge leads to what? Liberation. There you go. And so, liberation, the gaining of liberation would not be possible without the development of wisdom. So these 2 things go hand in hand. And thus, when we undertake a retreat like this, the development of wisdom or insight knowledge is foremost. Now, since we've been practicing together already for a couple of days, it can be safely assumed that our meditators here have had at least some acts or some understanding of wisdom, or gained some aspect of wisdom. And the way this happens is as follows. Namely, when a meditator keeps the precepts, and then restrains the senses, slows down, spends the day in silence, and then starts observing the rising and falling movement of the abdomen and other predominant objects. Then gradually the meditator will discern, a meditator will come in contact with the rising and falling, which means he or she will start sensing some sensations there. And the next step then is making the distinction between the rising and the falling, seeing that these are two different phenomena and with two different qualities. And then meditators will also report, they oftentimes report that there is a gap between the end of the rising and the next falling, and a gap between the end of the falling and the next rising movement. And when a meditator then continues to practice, gradually the mental objects become predominant, and among those, first of all, wandering mind and sloth and torpor. Remember those first few days when you were suffering from frequent wandering mind and the dullness of the mind. And then, not so long after this, the hindrances come into play, and the 5 hindrances of sense desire, of ill will, of sloth and torpor, of restlessness and remorse, and of skeptical doubt. And the very arising of the hindrances is actually a wonderful thing. And the reason for this is that one, for one thing, learns to overcome these hindrances, and furthermore also gains familiarity with those mental states. And so prior to these, the mental states are somewhat unfamiliar territory. Now at least one gains some familiarity with the hindrances. And once one has overcome them, one's concentration turns or becomes strong, and then some wholesome mental states arise, frequently in the form of calmness. Meditators will say there's peacefulness, and frequently meditators will say there's clarity of the mind, and some even report gladness and joy. Gladness and joy over the fact that the 5 hindrances have been successfully overcome, and also because the pains and aches that previously were giving or causing so much trouble have been overcome. Now, in the presence of some clarity of mind and purity of mind, then all the necessary conditions are present for the first intuitive insight, or for the first lesson to arise. And after a couple of days, 4, 5, 6, 7 days of intensive practice, a meditator realizes that after all that exists in this fathom-long body of ours are just 2 basic categories of objects, namely, who knows? Pardon me?
Pleasant and unpleasant?
Pleasant and unpleasant, more pleasant. That is, well, it's not, what you're saying is correct, but that's not what I'm heading at.
Mind and body?
mind and body, there you go. And so mentality, materiality and mentality, all there is are material phenomena and mental phenomena. And upon deep observation, is there a sense of I or not? Is there a sense of self or not? You shake the head? Is correct. There is not. Now, this doesn't mean that at times the notion of a self still comes up, no doubt. But at least for a few moments or so, a meditator realizes during the deep meditation that all there is are just those physical and mental formations. And so there's no being there, no individual, no self, no ego, no man nor woman. And there have been, or there has been, at least to my knowledge, one meditator, upon realizing this first insight knowledge, the person cried. And you know why? Well, because of this loss, the person felt sorrow over having to let go of the self. The person was so attached to the notion of a self that seeing that it's not present at all times meant a big loss. Thus, the tears. But this loss only seems like a major loss, but in the end it's a loss for the better. And with this particular first the insight knowledge, the knowledge of discerning mind and matter, a meditator will also come to see an interdependence of mentality and materiality. So the body by itself cannot survive. The mind by itself can also not survive. So if there were only the mind, then we would have all sorts of impulses to do this, to do that, to say this, to say that, but we wouldn't have the materiality to do and to say. However, if we were to consist only of body without a mind, then again we would be in a rather poor shape. Now, the author or compiler of the Visuddhimagga has given a wonderful illustration for this particular interdependence between mind and matter. And it's that of a man born blind and a stool-crawling cripple. Now, both of these wanted to go on a journey, wanted to reach a certain destination. But you can imagine, the man born blind can't see and therefore doesn't know where to go. And the stool-crawling cripple, who's holding on to some stool, has eyes to see with, but no proper legs to walk with. So he too can't reach his destination. But when they get together, and then the man born blind says, who can walk, come, and says to the stool-crawling cripple, come, friend, climb on my back and sit on my shoulders, and then together we can travel or we can do this journey and reach our destination. And this is what they do. And thus the stool-crawling cripple climbs onto the shoulders of the man born blind, and then the cripple gives the cripple who can see gives instructions. Leave the right, take the left, and then leave the left, take the right, and in this way they reach their destination. Now, when it comes to this very first insight knowledge, there is more to it. And an aspect that we've discussed over the last few Dhamma talks once in a while, namely this ability to discern between wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. It first arises during the first insight knowledge. So, before this, a meditator may not necessarily realize what wholesomeness is and what unwholesomeness is, and what wholesome mental states are and unwholesome mental states are. However, when one starts practicing, then this becomes obvious. And another major benefit of the practice of this particular insight knowledge is that a meditator discovers the intentions, namely that every bodily and verbal act is preceded by a mental intention. So the mental intention to say something or to do something. Now, many people are not aware of those intentions, especially young people, and thus they display a rather impulsive behavior. And so as soon as some thought or an intention crosses the mind to do something, immediately they think they have to do it. Or the same thing, as soon as some thought arises, okay, let me say this or that, even if it may hurt the other person, well, he or she will just say whatever comes up. And so much damage can be done is done in this way. A meditator gains a tremendous advantage over a non-meditator in the sense that he or she tunes in or learns to tune into those intentions. And then being mindful of an intention, being aware of an intention, then has that moment or two to decide whether or not to act on the intention. On the intention. So, if the intention turns out to be unwholesome, one can briefly stop and then decide, okay, I'm not going to act on this. Or if the intention is wholesome, then one realizes, okay, there's nothing wrong with this, let's go ahead. And so discovering intentions then brings about a tremendous freedom from impulsive behavior. And so when you read about prisoners, or you even have direct contact, then you will find that oftentimes prisoners are in prison because they never learned to be mindful of, to recognize and to be mindful of their intentions. And so easily based on some misunderstanding, some wrongful word or so, some quarrel ensues, and then a person gets harmed, and then another person ends up, or the culprit ends up in prison. Now, maybe this much regarding the first insight knowledge. There would be much more to say, but we just don't have the time. Now, the second insight knowledge that occurs during the meditation practice is known as the knowledge of discerning cause and effect, Paccaya Parigaha Jnana, and this knowledge is basically about discerning cause and effect. Realizing that those same bodily and mental formations are connected by cause and effect, and they do not, or formations do not arise in a haphazard manner or caused by, or are they caused through some supreme being. And when we meditate, we see for ourselves again and again those certain causal links. And among the different causal links that meditators have related over the last few days, I'll just relate a few. Namely, let's say some anger arises in the mind, and and then the meditator finds that this gets accompanied by a tensing up of the body, or the anger may also lead to an acceleration of the heartbeat, or it may also lead to a flushing of the face, or it may lead to an increased perspiration and a clenching of one's fists. So that would be one example. And another example, and very common example, is that when a pain has arisen in one's certain body somewhere, and one observes this pain, then sooner or later some aversion might develop towards the pain. Naturally, the aversion doesn't arise without a cause. It arises because of the increasing pain. And then, as one keeps observing the pain, it might grow in intensity, and then, as a result of this, the intention to change one's posture might arise. So again, we have a connection here between the intention to change one's posture and the pain. And then what's else? Another causal link may be it's getting warmer and warmer in the hall, and then the body starts sweating, and as a result of this, then one might consider taking off a piece of clothing. And on the other hand, if it's outside, early in the morning, it's cold, and then this may lead to a shivering of the body, and this in turn may lead a person to then wear some extra clothes. And then I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, we mentioned how the mental factor of manasikara, attention, is responsible for choosing the next object of observation. So if we're sitting there at home and watching TV and having dinner and sitting on a sofa and just that's it. Now, then the mind or consciousness will have to choose the next object, and it is manasikara that then determines which object or what kind of consciousness occurs next, whether it is going to be a seeing consciousness or hearing consciousness or smelling consciousness, and so on. Now, this second insight knowledge is important to gain it right, and it's also important in terms of content, and it is one of the points in our meditation practice that shows us how formations are linked, and it shows us clearly that things are not happening in a haphazard manner. So our meditation practice itself is not unfolding in a haphazard manner, and also when we experience things, then there's always certain causes are there. Now, this then leads us to the end of our Dhamma talk. Let me conclude with a Dhammapada verse, namely 282, that says, "Indeed, wisdom is born of meditation. Without meditation, wisdom is lost. Knowing this twofold path of gain and loss of wisdom, one should conduct oneself so that wisdom may increase." And this is it for tonight. Now, do you have any questions or comments, or is there a need for some clarifications? Yes?
Would you, again, mind explaining why one would not have as part of a program, for example, for meditators once a week, with samatha, with the vipassana? You mentioned that you wouldn't recommend combining them.
Wait a minute, that I would recommend to combine.
No, you wouldn't.
Wouldn't, yes indeed. And so why have a program?
Well, there is actually a program right now in Toronto where there is a samatha at the beginning, walking meditation, and vipassana. So I would like to carry this wisdom that you have over to the teachers for discussion. But I would like, if possible, to have a little more clarity on it.
Let's see, in the way we practice Vipassana meditation here, the concentration develops quite naturally out of the observation of the predominant objects. And observing the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, and observing pains and aches as they are occurring, and the mental states and objects at the same stores, and so on. From moment to moment to moment, this requires certain concentration. And as we go on, the concentration gets stronger and stronger, and then it just works very, the concentration that arises is strong enough to then work together with the mental factors of mindfulness and other mental factors, so that wisdom arises. So, in the Mahasi tradition of Vipassana meditation, there's no need whatsoever to practice samatha before doing one's Vipassana. The development of concentration is kind of built into the instructions and into one's meditation. And the type of concentration that occurs during Vipassana meditation is known as Khanika Samadhi, namely momentary concentration.
And you mentioned last night that the samatha brings forth different knowledges?
No. It brings forth jhanas, the absorptions.
Oh, okay.
No.
Thank you.
Now, maybe to add to these, there are, of course, different approaches around, and what Goenka in his tradition of Vipassana is doing based on the instructions given by Ledi Sayadaw and Ubakin, he will instruct the meditators to do anapanasati for 3 days in a row, asking meditators to focus the attention focus the attention on the in and out breathing, and just to keep the mind there. So basically, this is not to develop wisdom, but rather to develop concentration. Once some amount of concentration has developed, then the instruction will be given. Okay, now do this certain body scan, or start observing objects, starting at the tip of the head and going all the way down to the toes, top of the head to the tip of the toes. Yes. Now, next question. Yes, Mac.
Sir, from last night you were talking about mental states.
Yes.
And you said there are 62 of them, or I don't know, some number.
You're adding 10.
Well, I don't need to know the number.
Yeah, good.
But then you started talking about lust and the absence of lust, anger and the absence of anger, delusion and the absence of delusion.
Yes.
I'm sorry, how does it go together? What's the point of it? Are they mental states?
Yeah. So, the greed is a mental state, the anger is a mental state, delusion is also a mental state. No? And related to greed is lust. Greed and lust, they're the same in essence. And so, then we have those 3 destructive emotions of greed, hatred, and delusion, and there exists also the opposing or the opposite wholesome mental states of non-greed, of non-hatred, and of non-delusion. And so, consciousness. So there's a moment of consciousness, and sometimes this consciousness will be accompanied by lust. So that's one case. And then at another point, there's a moment of consciousness, and in this case, it's accompanied by non-lust or non-greed. So does this help?
Is consciousness a mental state?
No. That's what I tried to explain last night.
Two other ones.
Please, you have to make a distinction between consciousness, which just is conscious of some object, and a variety of 52 different mental states or mental factors. And so a moment of consciousness will arise, and this then will be accompanied by a number of mental factors. So these two are kind of working together, just like in the case of an engine, a car engine. There'll be what do you call that?
There as well. What you're saying is that when one thing is there, the other thing is there.
Yes, right. So to an engine, there are different parts there. So likewise, to the mind, there are two different parts, and they have to work together in order to function well. Does that, I think it's now clear?
So, lust, greed or the absence of greed are those what you mean by the factors?
Yes.
And the consciousness is the awareness of the whole process.
Consciousness, no. Consciousness is just performing a very. It is that which is conscious of an object. But being conscious here is to be understood in a very rudimentary sense, very basic sense of just taking in an object, and not more than this. And the mental factors, a number of the mental factors, they perform further functions with regard to the object. So, for instance, the mental factor of feeling will then determine the feeling tone to the experience, and the mental factor of perception will contribute to how we perceive the object, or how we interpret the object. And so, then let me see. And then the mental factor of concentration, it will ensure that the associated mental states are all unified and all working together on that object. It's kind of like you have an object in the middle, and it's being worked on by a number of different mental factors, and consciousness itself is the most basic. It's kind of like like the foundation or so.
Then greed is one of those factors.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, I think I got it now.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So then, what next? Yes, who else?
Way in the back.
Way in the back.
You can hardly see where you are. You're back.
So then, please just raise your. Oh, yeah. Oh.
I had a question about the weightiness.
About the weightiness.
In each moment of consciousness, there is arising pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, but our experience isn't just pleasant or unpleasant. There's degrees of pleasant or unpleasant. I was wondering if you could explain that.
No, naturally there'll be degrees to this, to pleasant and unpleasant. Sometimes highly unpleasant, sometimes just a little bit unpleasant. And so, like with the other mental factors, they all come in degrees, but the essence is the same. For let's say a slightly unpleasant feeling, somewhat unpleasant feeling, and very unpleasant feeling, the essence is still unpleasant feeling. And the same thing for a pleasant feeling and for a neutral feeling. And
and so the degree is contained within the moment of consciousness and may be repeated, but that moment of consciousness has a certain degree of pleasant or unpleasant. It just comes with that moment.
It comes with that moment, and the degree of the pleasantness or unpleasantness will also depend on the other predominant mental states. And so, let's say when much wisdom is there, or let's say much equanimity is there, and then there is a tendency that these feelings are somewhat milder, not as pronounced. And so what I'm trying to say is, in some insight knowledges, so levels of wisdom or so, the accompanying feeling to an experience can be very pronounced, and at other points it's maybe not that pronounced. Then, yes, Nicola.
If mindfulness is present and there's an awareness that mindfulness is, say, dull or sharp or whatever, is it mindfulness that knows that mindfulness is dull or sharp, or is it consciousness that knows that?
This is a good question. I suppose it's mindfulness itself. Mindfulness, the mental factor of mindfulness reflects on itself and then realizes that it's not, that it's dull or sharp. No, the mind has this, rather intriguing ability to reflect on itself. No, and that's just the way it is.
So consciousness isn't the knowing of states.
Wait. Please, when you speak of consciousness, rather say consciousness is conscious of, instead of saying knowing, because knowing, it's wisdom that knows.
And wisdom falls under the mental factors, not...
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand.
It's not the same. So... there are differences here between consciousness and then perception and then wisdom. And consciousness is the most basic way of being conscious. So it's just this taking in of an object. And so the perception in relation to an object means perceiving its qualities or its signs as in terms of the form or shape or color and this or that feature. No? And whereas wisdom knows the three universal characteristics and whatever, and knows an object maybe as arising, passing away, or as dissolving, or this or that.
So consciousness is it just like wakefulness or non-wakefulness? Is it as simple as that?
You can say like this, yes. Consciousness is certainly somewhat active, no? Active and wait a minute. This may be not quite correct. There are various kinds of or consciousness can perform different functions, many different functions. And so like I said, all that consciousness is doing is taking in an object. So being conscious of the presence of an object. And then one type of consciousness is the so-called bhavanga citta, which is the life continuum, and that is a rather passive type of consciousness. And it's the type of consciousness that occurs like during sound sleep, but it also occurs during our waking hours when no predominant object is impinging on the same stores. So when we're in a state of kind of like daydreaming, or even a little bit more than this, not really aware of anything. No.
That's one kind, and was there another kind?
Oh, there are lots of there's death consciousness, and there's rebirth linking consciousness, and so on and so forth.
Okay, I just thought there was a second one.
Okay, and then Alan.
Would it be safe to use the metaphor for most common consciousnesses as a mirror, that it just simply reflects what is there. And it doesn't do anything other than just sees what it's like a mirror.
Well, maybe we can say like this, but there's no deeper knowing there.
A mirror does not know.
Right.
It's just whatever in front of the mirror. That's the mirror.
Yeah, right. So then we can say like you propose. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Steve.
Maybe building on these last two. For instance, when one is driving a car, but not knowing that one is turning to the left, one is involved in something else, but conscious enough so one doesn't drive off the road. Or how would you maybe another way to ask the question is, how would you distinguish how you're using the word consciousness from the Freudian categories of conscious, unconscious, and pre-conscious?
Well, what do you mean? Good. Okay. So the answer to these is, from a Buddhist perspective, there are no two consciousnesses. There is only one at a time, and that's a Freudian understanding of consciousness at the surface, and then there's the unconscious part to the mind, and then there's what you call the pre-conscious. No. In Buddhist Abhidhamma, this certainly is not accepted, because there's only, and so like I explained, I think yesterday, last night to you, there's only one moment of consciousness occurring at a time. And so that moment of consciousness will take in one object and not two or three. And so you don't have two or three moments of consciousnesses operating simultaneously. However, having said all of this, in meditation we can distinguish between objects that are at first easily accessible in the mind, and others that are accessible through mindfulness only later on with more mindfulness. So things like deep levels of ignorance or deep levels of restlessness and so on, they're way down in the mind. No, but in Buddhism we don't say the unconscious. No, just by way of definition. Okay, then there was one more. Yes, Joan.
If a meditator were to have an experience of where the predominant quality of it was an experience of the predominant thing was the knowing. So as if the knowing of objects, that the objects or the characteristics of the objects kind of fell away, and it was this knowing were knowing itself. What would that be?
Wait a minute. Knowing what the object, knowing the object itself.
Yeah, just sort of like knowing. It's sort of like knowing itself. I mean, it's just a sense of that there's objects being known, but you're no longer noticing so much what the objects are. It's just a sense of knowing.
This is, sure enough. Yeah. So this is similar to what Nicola asked, whether mindfulness can be mindful of itself.
Yeah.
No. So the way this happens is most likely that you have an object, no? And then there's knowledge of this object, so wisdom with regard to this object. And then the next moment of consciousness in which wisdom will arise again might take that earlier moment of wisdom or knowledge as an object and then know that. This is possible.
So that's just what it is?
Yeah, sure enough. No, it's just knowing the knowing.
Knowing the knowing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Isn't that then an element of memory that comes into...
Yeah, right. And that's all the element of memory is performed by the mental factor of sanya. Sanya, which is perception. So part of perception is recognition, and that includes the memory. No, so the mind is just, or the mental factor of wisdom or knowledge is taking another mental object as an object, or a mental event as an object of observation, and in this, as you're proposing, the previous knowing. So the mind knows that it has a known, or that it did know. And the mind is flexible. However, or I'll give you another example. Something that the meditators once in a while experience, and is actually not that pleasant. Namely, because of some condition one gets into fear. No? And then, in the course of this, what may happen is one develops fear of fear. So it becomes kind of a double fear or triple fear, and this gets dangerous. And then one needs to cut it. Now, getting afraid of falling into fear. And okay. It's already 8:23. We're approaching 2 hours, so maybe this much for tonight. More tomorrow.